I mean no harm!
Who? Ha! Intruder!
Why are you here? Please, my plane crashed. I mean no harm.
He is an intruder.
No, please!
Take him away.
Billionaire plane crash lands on a forbidden island. The villagers' reaction will shock you. The plane hit the beach with a loud boom. Sand flew everywhere. The ocean splashed up like it was angry. For a second, everything was silent. Then the metal started popping and cracking, and then a man crawled out. He was shaking. His suit was torn and dirty. His face was full of sand and tears. He dropped to his knees, right there on the beach, and threw his hands up, because he saw them. 9 men came out of the trees with spears, moving fast, surrounding him like hunters. Their faces were painted, their eyes were hard. The spear tips came close, too close, and behind them stood their king, staring at the stranger without blinking. Then the leader raised his spear and shouted something, and the whole beach held its breath, because it looked like they were about to end him right there, 1 hour earlier. In the village hidden beyond the trees, life stopped mid-breath. A woman carrying firewood froze. 2 boys chasing each other fell silent. Even the birds seemed to vanish. Then, all at once, the village erupted into movement. Warriors snatching spears, elders stepping out of huts, people whispering the oldest warning they knew. The earth has spoken. At the sacred fire, King Ngoro rose slowly. He was the ruler of the village, an elderly man with a calm face, and an authority so deep it didn't need a loud voice. He listened for a moment, eyes narrowed toward the direction of the crash, then lifted one hand and gave a short command. The warriors moved immediately. Leading them was Corey, a fierce village hunter and warrior, known for distrusting anything unfamiliar. He was bare-chested, his face marked with pale paint, his grip tight around his spear, as if he had been waiting his whole life for a moment like this. They ran through the jungle path in a tight line, feet silent on the earth. The closer they got, the more unnatural the sound became. Metal clicking, glass cracking, waves slapping against something that did not belong. Then the trees opened, and they saw it. A strange beast of metal lay wrecked on their sacred sand, torn open like a fruit split by force. Smoke drifted from it in thin strands. The sea touched its side, then retreated again, as if confused. For a breath, the warriors simply stared. Then Corey's eyes locked onto movement. A man crawled out through the ripped side of the wreck, coughing as if he had swallowed the ocean. His clothes were expensive but ruined. His skin was coated in sand. He dragged himself onto the beach, shaking, blinking at the sun, like someone waking in a new world. This was Malik Cross, a black American billionaire from a faraway city, a man used to glass towers and guarded rooms, now reduced to raw survival. He lifted his head, saw the spears, and froze so completely it was as if his body had turned to stone. Malik raised both hands slowly, palms open. "Please, I'm not here to," he began in a rough voice, but the warriors did not understand his words. They understood his fear. Corey stepped forward first, spear aimed at Malik's chest. His voice cut through the air like a whip, and 2 other warriors circled Malik as if he might suddenly transform into something dangerous. Malik's eyes darted from face to face, painted cheeks, hard stares, sharp spear tips. He took one slow step back, then another, until his heel hit the twisted wreck behind him. He turned his head and saw the torn metal again. No escape. Corey shouted again, angrier. Malik swallowed, trying to steady his breath. In the city, Malik was the man people listened to. Here, he was a stranger who couldn't even explain his own name. Behind the warriors, the jungle rustled once more. King Ngoro arrived. He walked onto the beach without hurry, as if the ocean itself had invited him. He stared at the wreckage first, then at Malik, and finally at the sky, like he was measuring whether this stranger was a man or a message. Corey spoke quickly to the king, pointing toward the sea. Malik didn't need translation to understand what Corey wanted. Throw him into the water. Let the ocean erase him. Malik opened his mouth to beg again, but his body betrayed him. His knees buckled, his vision blurred, and the world tilted sideways. He fell to the sand, half conscious, hearing distant voices like echoes underwater. For one terrifying moment, Corey lifted his spear, ready to end it right there. Then King Ngoro raised one hand. A single motion, and everything stopped. The warriors moved fast, building a stretcher from palm leaves and stitched vines. They lifted Malik like a dangerous secret they did not trust, but could not ignore. As they carried him toward the jungle, the waves continued to whisper against the broken plain, and deep inside the trees, the village drums began to beat, slow, steady, and full of warning. Because on that island, everyone knew the truth. When the sea delivers a stranger, it is never by accident. 2 days after the crash shook the island beach, the ocean still held its secret. But far away in a gleaming coastal city, Malik Cross's name had become a whisper that wouldn't settle. Posters with his face were taped to street poles, bus stops, and glass walls. News anchors mentioned his disappearance carefully, because men like Malik didn't just vanish. They were usually surrounded by security, schedules, and control. Inside the Cross family home, grief moved like a shadow. Mrs. Cross, Malik's mother, sat in the living room with tired eyes and trembling hands. She was a dignified woman who had raised her son with discipline and faith, but the silence in the house was heavier than anything she had ever carried. Every few minutes, she stared at her phone as if her stare alone could make it ring. Across the room stood Nia Cross, Malik's younger sister, sharp-minded, brave, and stubborn in the way only a sister could be. While their mother sank into exhaustion, Nia stayed in motion. She called hospitals, she called airports, she called private contacts Malik once helped. She refused to accept the word missing as if it were a final sentence. That evening, the front door opened softly. Serena Vale stepped in. Malik's fiancée. She was polished and beautiful, dressed in perfect calm, the kind of woman who always looked like she belonged in expensive rooms. Her voice sounded gentle when she greeted them, but her eyes moved too quickly, scanning the house like she was counting what was hers. "I'm here," Serena said, placing a hand to her chest, as if she was heartbroken. "We'll get through this." Mrs. Cross stood and hugged her, desperate for any comfort. Nia didn't hug back, she simply watched. Later that night, a man in a dark suit arrived, Attorney Briggs, the family lawyer. He carried a folder thick with documents and wore the tense expression of someone who knew he was walking into trouble. They sat at the dining table under soft light. Attorney Briggs cleared his throat. "I need to explain something important," he said carefully. "If Malik is declared legally dead, certain controls transfer, companies, properties, accounts." Mrs. Cross's face tightened. "Declared dead?" she whispered, as if the words burned her tongue. Serena leaned forward immediately. "No one is declaring him dead," she said, voice smooth. "But we have to be realistic. Malik would want his affairs protected." Nia narrowed her eyes. "Protected by who?" Serena's smile didn't break. "By me. By family." Attorney Briggs hesitated, then added, "There is also a will." Mrs. Cross's fingers gripped the table edge. "What does it say?" Serena answered too quickly. "We don't need to discuss that now." Nia caught it. The speed, the control. The way Serena's calm didn't match the pain in their home. The next morning, Mrs. Cross stood in the kitchen, staring out the window, barely eating. That was when a knock came at the door. A tall man stepped in, wearing a simple suit and a warm expression. This was Pastor Eli Stone, the family's longtime pastor, steady, gentle, and known for speaking truth even when it made people uncomfortable. He looked at Mrs. Cross like he could see straight through her grief. "Don't bury your son with your thoughts," Pastor Eli said softly. "Not without proof." Mrs. Cross broke down quietly. "But what if he's gone?" Pastor Eli shook his head once. A mother knows, and your spirit is not saying goodbye. It's saying wait. Across the hallway, Nia heard Serena's voice on the phone, low, controlled, and far too calm for a grieving fiancé. Just push it, Serena murmured. Once they sign, we move forward. Nia stepped back into the shadows, heart pounding, and in that moment, she realized something that made her stomach turn. Serena wasn't falling apart. She was organizing. That same night in the city, while Serena's quiet phone call still rang in Nia's ears, the island village held its own kind of meeting. A meeting that could decide whether Malik Cross would live long enough to ever come home. The moon hung over the jungle like a watchful eye as villagers gathered around the sacred fire. Flames danced upward, throwing orange light across painted faces and carved beads. The air smelled of smoke, herbs, and fear. Malik lay inside a guarded palm hut, not far from the circle, still unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. 2 warriors stood at his door, spears crossed, listening to every sound he made like the sound itself might be a trick. At the center of the fire circle sat King Ngoro, upright on his carved stool, his expression calm but unreadable. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the ancestors on his shoulders. To his right stood Prince Jahan, his son, young, proud, and hungry to prove he was the future ruler. Jahan's eyes were sharp tonight, and his patience was thinner than smoke, and in front of them stood Corey, spear in hand, as if he was the fire's guard dog. Corey spoke first. He described the crash, the metal beast on the shore, the stranger crawling out like a sea spirit wearing human skin. He told them Malik's clothing was too fine, his skin too clean, his presence too strange. Then Corey delivered his conclusion, his voice loud enough to cut silence into pieces. He must be thrown into the sea. A wave of murmurs spread across the elders. One elder, voice shaking, argued that outsiders always came with trouble. Another elder suggested they keep Malik alive only to use him, because if the stranger had come from the sky, maybe he knew secrets that could strengthen the village. That idea made several people nod, not because it was right, but because fear makes ugly ideas sound useful. Prince Jahan stepped forward. He didn't speak like a boy. He spoke like a man performing power. He said the island had remained untouched for generations, because they obeyed the old rules. He reminded them the sea was their wall, their protection, and if one outsider had arrived, it meant more could follow. Then he said something that made the fire seem to burn hotter. If we let him live, we invite the world. Corey nodded at Jahan's words like they were prophecy, but before the council could lock itself into one path, a slow tapping sound approached the circle, a staff against earth. Villagers shifted aside as Mama Sefu entered, leaning on her carved walking stick. She was the village healer, elderly, respected, and feared in equal measure. People trusted her hands because her herbs had saved children and warriors alike, but they also feared her wisdom because it didn't bow to pride. Mama Sefu didn't argue loudly. She didn't insult anyone. She simply crouched by the fire and dropped dried leaves into the flames. The smoke changed instantly, swirling thicker, curling upward as if it carried words. Mama Sefu watched it carefully, then lifted her chin. She spoke in a calm voice that forced the circle to listen. She reminded them the storm that brought Malik was not ordinary, and the sea did not deliver something without purpose. Killing too quickly, she warned, could make the island punish them for spilling blood they didn't understand. Prince Jahan scoffed, his mouth tightening with disrespect. But before he could speak again, King Ngoro raised one hand. Silence fell so sharply it felt like the whole village held its breath. The king spoke at last, slow and firm. The outsider would not be killed tonight. Not yet, but he would not be free either. Malik would remain locked away, watched day and night. Mama Sefu would treat him, not as a guest, but as a living question they needed answered. The council began to disperse, but the decision did not bring peace. Prince Jahan's eyes followed the jungle path that led to Malik's hut, his face twisted with restrained anger, because the king had chosen caution, and Jahan hated caution. As the fire burned lower and the drums softened into the night, Prince Jahan leaned close to Corey and spoke so quietly it sounded like the darkness itself had said it. Corey's jaw flexed, then he nodded once, and in the shadows beyond the firelight, a plan began to breathe. The following morning, while Malik lay guarded in a palm hut on an island he couldn't name, the city was waking up to a different kind of storm. Not wind, not rain, paperwork. Inside the Cross family home, Mrs. Cross moved slowly through the kitchen, holding her phone like it was fragile. She hadn't slept well. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined Malik calling out for her. Then the silence returned. Across the room, Nia Cross sat with a laptop open, her fingers tapping like drums. She searched shipping reports, flight logs, and emergency calls, anything that could explain how a man with wealth, protection, and power could vanish. Then the front door clicked, high heels, soft perfume, a calm voice. Serena Vale entered like she owned the air in the room. Malik's fiancé wore a fitted blazer and perfect hair, as if she had stepped out of a magazine cover rather than a tragedy. She placed a small gift bag on the table and offered a smile that looked warm from a distance, but cold up close. "I brought breakfast," Serena said. "You both need strength." Mrs. Cross forced a polite nod. "Thank you, my dear." Nia didn't smile back. "Where were you last night?" Serena blinked slowly, like the question bored her. "Handling calls. This situation requires maturity, Nia." That word, maturity, landed like an insult wearing lipstick. Later that afternoon, Attorney Briggs returned, folder in hand. His shoulders were tense, as if he was being pulled in two directions. Serena guided him to the living room before Mrs. Cross could even sit properly. "Let's be practical," Serena said, opening the folder herself, as if it belonged to her. "We need to secure the estate. Malik would want that." Mrs. Cross's eyes narrowed. "Secure it from who?" Serena's smile sharpened. "From confusion, from outsiders, from people who take advantage when families hesitate." Nia leaned forward. "Or from you." The room cooled instantly. Attorney Briggs cleared his throat. "There are emergency provisions," he said carefully. "If Malik remains missing for a certain period, temporary control can shift to the person listed in his documents." Mrs. Cross's voice trembled. "And who is that?" Serena's gaze flicked away for half a second, just long enough for Nia to notice. "Malik loved me," Serena said smoothly. "He trusted me." Nia's stomach tightened. Serena wasn't grieving. She was positioning herself. That evening, Nia went upstairs to search Malik's office. She pulled drawers open, checking papers, scanning folders. Then she found something that made her heart race. A printed email about a large property sale, already drafted, already prepared. The buyer's name was unfamiliar. The date was soon. Nia quickly snapped a photo for evidence. Downstairs, Mrs. Cross moved quietly past the hallway, and she stopped when she heard Serena's voice in the kitchen. Serena wasn't speaking kindly anymore. "You're clinging to false hope," Serena said coldly. "If you don't sign, you'll lose everything anyway. Malik is gone." Mrs. Cross's hand covered her mouth. Serena continued, voice sharper now. "And let's be honest, you can't manage this without me." Mrs. Cross stepped into the kitchen, her eyes wet but strong. "Don't speak about my son, as if he's already buried." Serena turned, her face rearranging into sweetness like a mask snapping into place. "I'm only trying to protect you." "Protect me," Mrs. Cross whispered. "Or protect yourself." Serena's eyes flashed, just once, before her smile returned. Then, as if to prove she had nothing to hide, Serena reached for her phone and walked away, speaking loudly enough for Nia to hear. "Yes," Serena said into the phone, voice light. I told them, we just need the signature. After that, we move forward. Nia stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the railing, because for the first time, she wasn't just suspicious. She was sure. Serena Vale wasn't waiting for Malik to return. She was waiting for Malik to be declared dead. That same night, while Serena's plans quietly tightened around the Cross family home, the island held Malik Cross in a different kind of trap, one made of silence, spears, and unknown rules. Malik drifted in and out of sleep beneath a palm frond roof. The air inside the hut was warm and thick with the scent of crushed leaves. His body ached, but the sharpest pain wasn't in his ribs or his bruised shoulder. It was the fear of not knowing what came next. Outside his door, 2 guards shifted positions, their spear tips scraping lightly against the earth. Malik's eyes opened slowly, and for a moment he didn't remember where he was. Then he saw the woven walls, the shadows moving at the entrance, and the firelight flickering through cracks like watchful eyes. He swallowed hard and tried to sit up. His head spun, but he forced himself steady. A small figure appeared at the doorway, careful, quiet. This was Marek, the village healer's young apprentice. He held a coconut shell glass filled with water, and he approached Malik the way someone approaches a wounded animal, respectful, uncertain, but not cruel. Marek offered the water with both hands. Malik accepted it slowly, nodding with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, though the boy didn't understand the word. Malik took a sip, then gently pointed to Marek and raised his eyebrows as if asking his name. Marek hesitated, then touched his own chest. "Marek," he said softly. Malik repeated it carefully. "Marek." The boy's eyes widened, surprised Malik could copy the sound. For the first time since the crash, Malik saw something other than suspicion in someone's face. Curiosity. Marek left quickly before the guards could scold him for lingering. Malik lay back down, staring at the ceiling, listening to the village beyond the hut. He heard distant drums, soft chanting, and footsteps moving like the village never fully slept. Then later, when the night deepened and the guards' voices grew lazy with fatigue, something changed. A faint rustle. A shadow moved near the hut wall. Malik's muscles tightened, the hut's entrance lifted slightly, and a figure slipped inside as quietly as smoke. She wasn't a guard. She didn't carry a spear. She carried a small bowl wrapped in cloth. This was Aina, the village's most admired young woman, known for her calm grace, her steady eyes, and the quiet strength people often mistook for softness. Her hair was braided neatly, and her posture was careful, as if she knew one wrong sound could ruin everything. Aina knelt and set the bowl in front of Malik. Warm food. The smell alone made Malik's throat tighten. He stared at her, stunned. Aina pressed one finger to her lips. Not a word, just a warning. Malik nodded quickly. He ate slowly, watching her face. She watched him too, not with fear, but with a strange seriousness, as if she was trying to decide what kind of man he really was. Malik gently pointed to himself. "Malik," he said clearly. Aina blinked, then repeated it softly. "Malik." Then she touched her chest. "Aina." Malik repeated. "Aina," careful and respectful. Aina glanced toward the doorway, then quickly dragged her fingertip across the dirt floor, drawing a simple picture. A circle, a line, and another circle, like an island surrounded by water. Then she drew tall shapes, straight and narrow, like towers. Malik understood. She was asking where he came from. He took a deep breath and drew his own shapes, bigger towers, roads, and a small car. He pointed upward, miming flying, then pointed to the wreck. Aina's eyes widened slightly, like his world sounded impossible. She reached into a small pouch at her waist and pulled out a shell charm, smooth and pale, carved with a tiny symbol. She placed it in Malik's palm, then closed his fingers around it. A gift, or a promise. Before Malik could speak again, Aina lifted her head sharply, listening. Footsteps. She rose quickly, her movements controlled, and slipped out as silently as she came. Malik sat there holding the carved shell, heart pounding, because he understood one thing clearly now. Someone in that village didn't want him dead, and that someone had just risked everything to prove it. The next evening, while Malik sat in a guarded hut turning Ina's carved shell over and over in his palm, the city was getting louder, phones buzzing, doors slamming, and people speaking about Malik Cross like he was already a memory. In the Cross family home, Nia Cross stood in Malik's office, staring at the photo she had taken of the drafted property sale. Her jaw was tight, her mind was sharper. She didn't just feel something was wrong anymore. She had evidence. Downstairs, Mrs. Cross sat at the dining table with her hands folded, not eating, only listening. Every sound in the house felt like it carried hidden meaning. Even the refrigerator humming felt like a threat. Then the doorbell rang. Nia walked down and opened the door. A tall man in a tailored jacket stood there, forcing a friendly smile. This was Dante Reed, Malik's longtime best friend, known in their circle for charm, jokes, and loyalty, at least on the surface. "Nia," Dante said warmly, stepping in like he belonged. "I came as soon as I heard. How's your mom holding up?" Nia didn't answer the way he expected. She stared at him for a long moment, studying his face like she was reading a lie. "You've been talking to Serena," Nia said flatly. Dante chuckled nervously. "Serena? She's the fiancée, Nia. Of course we've talked. We're all trying to..." "Trying to what?" Nia cut in. "Help or control?" Mrs. Cross entered the hallway quietly. "Dante," she whispered, as if hearing his voice reminded her Malik was still missing. "Thank you for coming." Dante's expression softened, and he took Mrs. Cross's hand with fake tenderness. "Auntie, we're going to find him," he promised. "Malik is strong." But Nia's eyes didn't soften, because she noticed something small, something loud. Dante wore a sleek watch with a silver shine, one Malik had once admired. Nia remembered it clearly because Serena had gifted it to Malik on his birthday. Malik had joked about it being too flashy. Now it sat on Dante's wrist, like it belonged there. Nia's stomach turned. Dante noticed her stare and quickly tugged his sleeve down. This old thing?" he said, laughing too quickly. "Just something I picked up." Nia nodded slowly, pretending to accept it, but her mind filed it away like a knife. That night, Mrs. Cross moved quietly into the kitchen for water and froze when she heard Serena's voice. Serena was on the phone again, speaking with careless confidence. "She's stubborn," Serena murmured, referring to Mrs. Cross. "But she'll break. They always do." Mrs. Cross's heart clenched. "And Briggs," Serena continued. "He's nervous, but money calms nervous men. Once the signatures are done, I don't want any delays." Mrs. Cross stepped back, shaking. Upstairs, Nia sat on her bed, replaying everything. Serena's calm, the drafted sale, Dante's watch. The way Attorney Briggs looked like a man being squeezed. It didn't feel like grief. It felt like a takeover. The next day, Nia pretended to leave for errands, but instead she parked down the street and waited. Hours passed. Her hands sweated on the steering wheel. Then she saw Serena step outside the house, and she wasn't alone. Serena climbed into a sleek car. Dante climbed in too. Nia's breath caught. She started her engine quietly and followed at a distance, careful not to be seen. They drove to a quiet restaurant across town, one with tinted windows and private booths. Nia watched from outside as Serena and Dante sat too close, laughing like there was nothing to mourn. Then Serena reached across the table and touched Dante's hand. Not like a grieving woman, like a woman making plans. Nia's throat tightened. She lifted her phone and took pictures, proof she couldn't be talked out of later. As she watched, Dante leaned in, speaking low, and Serena laughed, smooth, satisfied, unafraid. Nia whispered to herself, voice shaking with disbelief, "No, not you too." And in that moment she understood something that felt even worse than betrayal. While Malik fought to survive somewhere in the world, the people closest to him were already replacing him. 3 nights after Aina first slipped into Malik's hut, the village no longer whispered about the stranger. Now they argued about him openly. Malik sat upright for the first time without feeling the whole world spin. The healer's herbs had helped, but so had time, rest, and his stubborn refusal to surrender. He still wore the marks of the crash, bruises, stiffness, quiet pain, but strength had returned to his eyes, and the village noticed. Some men muttered that he recovered too quickly. Others said maybe the sea had sent him because he belonged to something powerful. A few even believed the crash wasn't an accident, but a message. Only one thing was certain: Malik was no longer invisible. Inside the hut, Malik turned the carved shell charm in his hand like it was a compass. Every night Aina came, careful and quiet, bringing food, water, and something even more dangerous than kindness: hope. They spoke in gestures and drawings. Malik sketched tall buildings again, cars, bright lights. Aina listened like a child hearing a new kind of magic. Sometimes she drew the ocean and tapped her chest, as if to say the sea lived inside her too. But there were also moments when Aina's smile disappeared. One night, she entered with less warmth and more weight in her eyes. She sat closer than usual, then slowly lifted her wrist toward Malik. A bracelet, woven tight, decorated with small beads, and a carved piece of wood shaped like a crown. Malik frowned, confused. Aina pointed to the bracelet, then pointed toward the center of the village where the king's hut stood. Then she drew a man in the dirt, tall, wearing a crown-like symbol. Malik's stomach tightened as understanding crept in. Before he could ask, Aina drew herself beside that man. Then she crossed it out hard. "No," she whispered in broken English, her voice shaking. Malik's eyes widened. He pointed at the crossed-out picture, then pointed at her, as if asking, "You don't want this?" Aina shook her head firmly. She pressed her palm to her chest, then pointed at Malik. In that moment, Malik understood something dangerous. Aina was promised to someone else, and she was refusing it. The very next day, the village gathered at the sacred fire. Drums beat in celebration rhythm, but beneath the sound, tension lived like a hidden blade. King Ngoro stood before the people. Beside him stood Prince Jahan, dressed in ceremonial cloth and beads, his chin lifted like a man who believed the world owed him loyalty. He raised his hands to the crowd and spoke with confidence. The wedding date was set. Aina would marry him soon. The villagers cheered, but not all of them sounded joyful. Some cheered because tradition demanded it. Others cheered because they feared what would happen if the prince was denied. Aina stood in the crowd, silent. Her eyes didn't sparkle. They didn't soften. They looked like a storm waiting for its moment. Malik watched from the shadows of his hut doorway, guarded, unseen by most, but not unseen by Jahan. Prince Jahan's gaze slid across the crowd and locked on Malik's direction for a heartbeat too long. His expression didn't show fear, it showed ownership. That night, Aina didn't come at her usual time. Malik waited longer than he should have, heart pounding with worry. When she finally arrived, she moved fast, breath shallow, eyes wide. "Corey," she whispered, then made a gesture of someone walking behind her. Malik's muscles tightened. Aina grabbed Malik's hand and pressed it to the shell charm, as if reminding him, "Remember, trust." Then she backed away, listening. Outside, a faint footstep shifted in the sand. Aina's face hardened. She slipped out instantly, vanishing into darkness. A second later, the hut door lifted. Not Aina. A shadow filled the entrance, broad shoulders, spear in hand. It was Corey. He didn't step inside. He only stared at Malik with cold certainty, like a hunter who had just confirmed what he suspected. Then Corey turned and disappeared into the night. Malik stood frozen, shell charm tight in his fist, because he knew what that meant. Corey had seen enough, and now Prince Jahan would know too. And Prince Jahan, didn't shout when he wanted something. He smiled. And that was worse. The following morning, something changed in the village. It wasn't a drumbeat. It wasn't a warning cry. It was quieter than that. So quiet people didn't notice until it spread. A woman who usually laughed loudly while pounding grain sat outside her hut, silent, sweating, her eyes unfocused. A fisherman who never missed sunrise didn't leave his doorway. A child who ran everywhere lay curled on a mat, too tired to play. By midday, whispers started moving faster than feet. Something is wrong. By evening, fear had a name. The stranger brought it. Inside Malik's hut, he heard the village shift before he saw it. The guards outside spoke in tense bursts, and their spear tips scraped the ground more often, like nervous hands needed something to hold. Malik sat up, listening, trying to understand. The air felt heavier. Even the wind through the palm leaves sounded worried. Then the hut door lifted, and Mama Sefu entered with Marek behind her. Marek didn't bounce in like before. He moved slowly, shoulders drooping, his face dull. His eyes, usually bright, looked tired and glassy. Malik's chest tightened. Marek tried to hand Malik water, but his hand shook. Mama Sefu touched Marek's forehead, then frowned. She murmured to him and guided him to sit on the mat near the wall. Malik pointed to Marek, and then to his own chest, asking without words, "Is he okay?" Mama Sefu's expression hardened. She didn't answer with language. She answered with the way she looked at Malik, like she wanted to believe he wasn't responsible, but the village would never give him that kindness easily. Outside, voices rose. Malik heard Prince Jahan's tone, sharp, furious, certain. Then Corey's voice joined in, louder, pushing the fear forward like a spear. Malik stood carefully, stepping toward the doorway, only to be blocked by a guard. The guard shouted at him to stay back. Malik lifted both hands slowly, trying to calm the moment. But calm didn't live here anymore. By nightfall, the sacred fire was surrounded again. Villagers gathered, not to celebrate, but to accuse. The drums weren't rhythmic tonight. They were urgent and uneven, like a heartbeat in panic. Prince Jahan stepped forward, pointing toward Malik's hut so aggressively it was like he was pointing at a criminal. He spoke with fire in his eyes, telling the crowd this was proof that outsiders carried poison, proof that the sea had delivered danger. Then he said the words Malik didn't understand, but the crowd's reaction translated it clearly. "Kill him." Malik's stomach dropped. From where Malik stood, blocked at his hut, he could see Aina in the crowd, her face pale, her hands clenched. She looked toward Malik's direction, then toward the king, like she was trying to stop a storm with her eyes. King Ngoro raised his hand for silence, but even his authority struggled against fear. He spoke firmly, and the crowd quieted enough to hear him. Malik would not be executed tonight. But the king's voice was colder than before. The king declared that Malik would remain locked away, watched even more closely. Mama Sefu would continue treatment for the sick, and if the illness worsened, if more villagers fell, the village would no longer hesitate. Malik swallowed hard. He wasn't just a prisoner now, he was a suspect. Back in the hut, Malik watched Marek struggle to sleep. He thought of the city, hospitals, medicine, clean water, hand-washing, distance, simple rules that saved lives. Here, fear was stronger than logic. Malik looked at his own hands, then at Marek, then at Mama Sefu. He pointed to the fire pot in the corner and mimed boiling water. Mama Sefu stared at him, uncertain. Outside, the village murmured like a gathering storm. Next morning, the village woke up with two things in the air: sickness and suspicion. Malik stood at the doorway of his hut under heavy guard, watching the village move like a frightened animal. People avoided each other. Warriors walked faster with spears in hand, as if sharp wood could protect them from something they couldn't see. Near the healer's hut, a small group lay on mats under shade. Their faces were tired, their bodies weak, their breaths shallow. It wasn't violent or graphic. just the kind of sickness that drained a person's strength and made fear grow loud. Mama Sefu moved among them with herbs and calm hands, but Malik could see it in her eyes. She was fighting with one hand tied, because half the village was watching her treatment, and the other half was watching Malik. Prince Jahan arrived with Corey at his side, both of them wearing the same expression, satisfied anger. They spoke to the king and the elders with certainty, like they wanted the illness to prove their point. And for a moment, Malik realized something terrifying. If the village needed a villain, they already had one. Malik took a slow breath and lifted his hands, gesturing toward Mama Sefu, then toward the sick mats. He pointed to himself, then shook his head firmly. Not me. Not poison. He then pointed to a large clay pot near a fire pit and mimed lighting fire, boiling water, and washing hands. The guards barked at him, confused. One even shoved him back. But Mama Sefu noticed. She paused mid-step and watched Malik's gestures closely. She had lived long enough to know when desperation was meaningless, and when it was intelligence trying to speak without words. Mama Sefu walked toward Malik. The villagers tensed, whispering. Malik pointed again. Boil, wash, separate. He picked up a cup from the ground and made a motion of 1 cup per person, then shook his head at sharing. He pointed to the sick mats and motioned that they should be moved slightly away from healthy families. Mama Sefu's eyes narrowed in thought. Then she surprised everyone. She turned to her helpers and spoke firmly. They obeyed immediately, bringing more water, more cloth, more space. She ordered a fire built stronger. She ordered a clay pot filled and set above the flames. The water began to heat. Some villagers protested. Corey scoffed, speaking loudly as if Malik had bewitched the healer. Prince Jahan stepped forward, voice sharp. He accused Malik of trying to control the village through strange new rules. He said Malik wanted them to obey him like servants. Mama Sefu didn't argue, she just kept working. When the water boiled, Mama Sefu dipped cloth into it and began cleaning hands. Hers first, then her helpers. Malik nodded quickly, showing approval, then pointed to the mats again and mimed distance. It was simple, but on the island, simple changes could feel like rebellion. The king arrived to watch. King Ngoro stood silent, observing the pot, the steam, the sick villagers, and Malik's calm focus. The king didn't smile, but his eyes shifted, less anger, more assessment. Hours passed, and then something happened that changed the sound of the village. A small cough eased. A woman who hadn't spoken all morning took a sip of clean water and whispered that her head felt lighter. Not a miracle, but improvement, hope. As evening approached, Prince Jahan's face tightened. Corey's grip on his spear hardened. They didn't look relieved that people were improving. They looked angry that Malik had gained something they didn't want him to have. Trust. As the sun lowered, King Ngoro turned and walked away without speaking to Malik. But as he passed, the king paused just long enough to glance at Malik's hands, steady, disciplined, unwilling to panic. That night, Aina slipped near Malik's hut again, her eyes shining with emotion. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. She simply pressed her hand briefly against Malik's, a silent thank you. Then she vanished into the dark. Malik exhaled slowly, staring at his hands again. In the city, Malik was powerful because of money. Here, on this island, Malik realized something else. Power came from saving what others thought was already lost. But as the drums softened into night, Malik didn't know one dangerous truth. Prince Jahan would never forgive him for that. The following night, the village drums did not sound like healing. They sounded like judgment. Even before Malik saw anyone, he felt it. The tension in the air, the way voices carried sharply through the huts, the way guards outside his door stood straighter than usual. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a crowd decides something together. Then the hut door flew open. 2 warriors grabbed Malik's arms. Malik tensed, but he didn't fight. He knew fighting would make him look guilty, even if he wasn't. He only raised his hand slightly, trying to show he wasn't a threat. They dragged him out into the open. Villagers poured toward the sacred fire, forming a wide circle. Faces glowed in firelight, some angry, some fearful, some uncertain. Elders leaned on staffs. Warriors stood with spears like a wall. At the front stood King Ngoro, his expression hard tonight, like the weight of leadership had sharpened him. Beside him stood Prince Jahan. Jahan's eyes gleamed like he had been waiting for this moment. His shoulders were squared, his voice ready. And when Malik was forced down near the fire, Jahan stepped forward and began speaking fast, loud, and with absolute certainty. Even without understanding the language, Malik understood the performance. Jahan was telling a story where Malik was not a survivor or a healer, a story where Malik was the reason the village suffered. Corey stepped forward next, spear in hand, and added fuel to the fire. He pointed toward the sick mats, toward the boiling pot, toward the changes Mama Sefu had allowed. He spoke as if Malik's help was an insult to tradition, as if clean water was a weapon, as if Malik's calm was suspicious. The crowd murmured, swaying between fear and doubt. Then Jahan delivered the line that made the circle tighten. He accused Malik of bringing the sickness on purpose, so he could pretend to be the cure. He accused Malik of trying to win trust, so he could steal secrets, steal land, steal the people. Malik's throat went dry. He shook his head firmly, pointing to his chest, then making a no motion with both hands. He pointed to the sick villagers and mimed caring, washing, protecting. But the crowd didn't want gestures. They wanted a target. King Ngoro lifted one hand for silence. It came, but it was thin. Fear still breathed beneath it. The king spoke slowly, his voice carrying across the fire. He asked questions. He watched Malik's face closely, like he was searching for truth in Malik's eyes. Malik stood straighter, forcing calm into his body. He pointed to the boiling pot again, then to Mama Sefu, then to the villagers who had improved. He tried to show that life was proof, but Jahan's expression never changed, because Jahan didn't care about proof, he cared about control. Then something happened that cracked the whole village in half. A voice rose from the crowd, clear, trembling, but strong. No. Everyone turned. Aina stepped forward. She moved into the firelight like someone walking into danger on purpose. Her eyes weren't soft tonight. They were steady, brave. And when she looked at Malik, she didn't look away. The village gasped, not because she spoke, but because she dared to stand close to the stranger. Aina spoke in her language quickly, her hands clenched at her sides. Malik didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning in her tone. She was defending him. Prince Jahan's face tightened, stunned, then twisted into rage. He stepped toward Aina, voice harsh, as if her loyalty belonged to him by law. King Ngoro's jaw flexed. The king looked at his son, then at Aina, then at the murmuring crowd. And Malik realized the king wasn't only judging Malik anymore, he was judging Aina. King Ngoro's voice fell like a final stone. Malik would be imprisoned again, tighter than before. And Aina would be confined for cleansing, watched closely until the village decided if her defiance was a betrayal. The crowd murmured louder. Some looked shocked, some looked satisfied, some looked afraid. Malik's chest tightened as warriors grabbed him again. He turned his head just once as they dragged him away. Aina met his eyes, and in that one look, brief and burning, Malik understood a promise without words. This wasn't the end. That night, as Malik was locked behind woven walls, and the village drums changed into a steady alarm rhythm, Aina whispered into the darkness so softly, only fate could hear it. "We run." The next evening, after Malik was locked away, and Aina was taken from the village eyes, the island did something strange. It celebrated, not with joy, but with ritual. The drums began before sunset, slow and heavy. echoing through the trees like footsteps of something old. Torches were lit. Painted warriors formed lines. Elders took their seats around the sacred fire, faces serious, voices low. To any outsider, it would have looked like a festival, but the villagers knew the truth. This was not a dance for happiness. This was a dance for decision. Malik sat inside his dark palm hut, listening to the rhythm through woven walls. He couldn't see the fire, but he could feel the drums in his chest like a second heartbeat. The sound rose, dipped, and rose again. Never random, always patterned, like it was speaking in a language deeper than words. Outside, in the firelight, the warriors began to move. Their bodies were painted with lines of white and red, their feet stamping the earth in synchronized steps. Spears lifted, lowered, turned, like they were drawing invisible shapes in the air. The dancers formed circles, then broke into straight lines, then returned to circles again, as if the ground itself was guiding them. And then Aina appeared. She was brought into the open by two older women, dressed in ceremonial cloth and beads that shimmered in the torchlight. A bracelet was tied tighter around her wrist, the same betrothal mark Malik had seen before, only now it looked heavier, like a chain disguised as jewelry. Ina's face was calm, but her eyes weren't. They were awake, watching, remembering. The villagers cheered politely as she stepped into the center of the circle, because the village expected her to look honored, expected her to look obedient. Prince Jahan stood near the king, watching her like she was property returning to its rightful shelf. His mouth held a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. King Ngoro watched too, but not with pride, with concern, like he could feel the village splitting beneath his feet. The dance began again, louder now. Ina moved with the dancers, forced into the pattern as if the dance itself was a command. She turned, stepped, stamped, and lifted her arms the way tradition demanded. But Malik, listening from the dark, could tell something else was happening, because the rhythm changed whenever Ina moved. The drums beat one way when the warriors formed a circle. Then the drums beat differently when they formed a line toward the lagoon. Then again when they shifted toward the northern trees. It was like the island was giving directions, hidden inside celebration. Near the healer's hut, Marek watched the dance with wide eyes. He had been ordered to sit quietly, but his mind was too curious to stay still. He studied the footwork, the spears, the shapes, and slowly, something clicked. The dance wasn't just movement, it was a map. Marek leaned closer to Mama Sefu, whispering urgently. Mama Sefu's expression tightened, then her eyes sharpened like a woman realizing she had just seen the answer she needed. She didn't speak aloud. She only nodded once. Ina's gaze flicked toward Marek for a heartbeat, then away again, careful not to expose the connection. As the dance reached its peak, the warriors stamped harder, and the drums became thunder. The circle tightened. The fire flared. That was when Ina did something so small no one noticed, except the people who mattered. As she spun, she let a tiny carved charm slip from her palm. It landed near Marek's feet. Marek's breath caught. He kept his face still and waited. Then, when the dancers passed again, he bent casually like he was adjusting his sandal and snatched the charm. It wasn't just a charm, it was a message. Marek turned it over in his hand and saw a simple carving, a crescent moon shape, and a line pointing toward water. When the moon bends, go to the lagoon. Marek's heart hammered, because he finally understood what the dance was truly doing. The village believed it was sealing the outsider's fate, but Ina was using it to open a door. As the drums slowed and the dancers fell into stillness, the elders raised their hands and ended the ritual. The villagers cheered again, satisfied the island had spoken. Prince Jahan smiled like a man who thought he had won. But far from the firelight, Marek slipped away into the shadows, gripping the carved charm like it was a secret key. Because the dance was over, and now the escape could begin. Later that night, after the drums faded and the village finally drifted into uneasy sleep, the island grew quiet enough to hear secrets moving. Malik sat in the dark of his hut, back against the woven wall, listening to the night. He could hear guards outside shifting their feet, whispering softly to each other, growing tired. He could hear insects humming in the distance like the jungle never truly rested. Then, very faintly, 3 soft taps came from the side of the hut. Malik's head snapped up, not the door, the wall. He stayed still, heart beating hard, and waited. 3 taps again. Then a small voice, barely louder than a breath. "Malik!" It was Marek. Malik crawled closer to the wall, pressing his ear to the woven palm. A thin gap opened as fingers pushed through. Marek whispered quickly, urgent and shaking. He didn't have many words in Malik's language, but he didn't need them. He slid something through the gap. A tiny carved charm. Malik's fingers closed around it. He rubbed the carving with his thumb, feeling the crescent shape, the line pointing toward water. Even without full understanding, Malik knew what it meant. A path, a time, a chance. Malik sat very still, breathing slowly. For the first time since the crash, he wasn't only surviving, he was preparing. Hours passed. The moon climbed higher, then began to tilt, hanging lower in the sky, like it was bending just as the charm predicted. Outside, guards' voices grew lazy, their posture softened. One laughed quietly at something the other said. Malik waited. Then he heard it, far away near the healer's hut. A sudden sharp cry, a commotion, voices rushing. It wasn't panic, it was distraction. Mama Sefu had moved. She had created the noise on purpose. Malik rose silently, heart pounding, and approached the door. He tested the simple latch with careful hands. It wasn't a city lock. It was rope and wood, strong but not impossible. He worked slowly, using patience instead of force. Then it gave. The hut door lifted. Malik stepped out into the night like a ghost. He froze immediately. Guard on the left, another on the right. But both had turned their heads toward the healer's direction, distracted by the sudden activity. Malik kept low, moved behind the hut, and slipped into the shadows between trees. The jungle swallowed him. Every step was careful. Every breath was controlled. Malik didn't run. Running made noise. Running brought attention. He moved like someone who understood one mistake could end everything. Then a shadow appeared between the trees ahead. Aina. She stepped into moonlight for only a second, just long enough for Malik to see her face. Her eyes were fierce tonight, no fear left in them. In her hands, she held a coiled rope and a carved wooden paddle, stolen from somewhere important. She didn't speak. She grabbed Malik's hand and pulled him forward. They moved through the jungle path like they had rehearsed it 100 times. They passed sleeping huts. They passed carved posts marking sacred ground. They passed a silent lookout, close enough that Malik could smell smoke on the man's clothes. Aina stopped once and pressed her finger to Malik's lips, pointing toward a narrow trail covered by hanging vines, a hidden route. They slipped through it, pushing leaves aside, stepping over roots, moving toward the sound of water. The lagoon. Aina's pace quickened, and Malik felt it. She sensed danger behind them. Then it happened. A branch snapped behind them. Both froze. Aina's eyes widened. Another sound. Footsteps. Fast. Aina pulled Malik down behind thick bushes. A torch flickered between trees. A voice hissed sharply in the island tongue. "Corey!" Malik's stomach clenched. Corey moved past, scanning the path like a hunter smelling blood. His spear tip glinted in torchlight as he searched. For a moment he stopped, so close Malik could hear his breathing. Aina held her breath. Malik held his. Then Corey moved on, disappearing deeper into the trees. Aina didn't wait. The second the torchlight faded, she pulled Malik up and ran, quietly but fast, toward the lagoon. They burst through the last line of trees and found the canoe hidden beneath reeds, exactly where the dance map had pointed. Aina shoved it into the water. Malik climbed in. Aina grabbed the paddle and pushed off. The canoe glided out, cutting through dark water. Behind them, a shout split the night. Torches erupted along the shore, and Corey's voice rose above the chaos like a curse. "Bring them back!" But the canoe was already moving, and the ocean, wide, waiting, and unpredictable, opened its arms. The following morning, the island was only a fading shadow behind them. Malik and Aina sat low in the canoe as the sun rose, painting the water gold. Their arms ached from paddling through the night, and their throats were dry, but neither of them spoke the word, stop. Every time Aina glanced back, Malik understood what she feared. Not just the village, not just Prince Jahan. Corey. Because Corey didn't chase like a man, he chased like a vow. The ocean was calmer than it had been on the night of the crash, but it was still the ocean, wide, unpredictable, and proud. Waves rolled under the canoe, like slow breathing. Sometimes the canoe dipped, and Malik's heart would jump, but Aina kept steady, her paddle moving like she, was born from water. Malik watched her in quiet admiration. In his world, courage was dressed in suits and security teams. Here, courage was a young woman paddling into the unknown, with nothing but stubborn faith. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. The canoe drifted farther from the island until it looked like a dark line on the horizon, almost unreal, like a story people told, rather than a place that existed. Then Aina stiffened and pointed. Far ahead, barely visible, a shape rose from the water. A ship, not a canoe, not driftwood. A ship with a tall body and a wide back, moving slowly across the sea. Malik's chest tightened with relief. He raised his hand and waved, his arm heavy from exhaustion. Aina did the same, lifting both arms, waving with desperate urgency. But the ship didn't turn. It kept moving. Malik's mind raced. He looked around, searching for anything they could use. He took off a torn strip of cloth from his sleeve and tied it to the paddle, waving it like a flag. Aina began paddling harder, her face tense, her lips pressed tight. The canoe cut forward faster, but the sea fought back, pushing waves against them like it wanted to test their determination. For a moment, Malik thought they might still make it. Then the sky darkened. It wasn't sudden like a violent storm. It was slower, like a heavy curtain being pulled across the sun. Clouds gathered in thick patches. The wind shifted and turned cold. Aina's eyes widened. Malik's stomach dropped. The ocean was changing moods. The waves rose higher, slapping the canoe harder. Water splashed inside, wetting their legs. Malik grabbed the side and steadied himself, trying to keep the canoe balanced. Aina paddled, but the current pulled sideways, dragging them off course. The ship was still ahead, but now it felt farther, as if the ocean was stretching the distance on purpose. Thunder rolled, low and distant, not frightening yet, but warning. Malik grabbed the paddle briefly, helping Aina with strong strokes. He could feel his muscles burning, but he forced power into every movement. Aina glanced at him, fear and gratitude mixed in her eyes. Then, through the darkening air, a horn sounded from the ship. A long, loud call. Malik's head snapped up. The ship had slowed. It was turning. Aina gasped softly, eyes shining. They waved again, harder now, refusing to believe hope until it touched them. The ship drew closer, tall and solid, with ropes hanging at the side. Men leaned over the rail, shouting in a language Malik understood. A ladder dropped, hands reached down. Malik grabbed Aina first, lifting her carefully. She was shaking from exhaustion, but she climbed with determination. Malik followed, his arms and legs trembling as he hauled himself up. When they finally stood on the deck, a thick blanket was thrown over Aina's shoulders. A sailor handed Malik water, and Malik drank like a man returning from the dead. A tall captain stepped forward, face weathered by sea life and sun. This was Captain Red, the cargo ship's commander. Streetwise, no nonsense, but honorable. He looked Malik over, then looked at Aina, then frowned at the canoe drifting behind them. "You two are lucky," Captain Red said, voice low. "Another hour and that sea would have swallowed you." Malik looked out at the horizon one last time. The island was almost gone, but as the ship began moving forward, Malik felt something cold crawl through his chest, because deep down he knew the truth. Escaping the island was only the first battle. Now he had to survive the world waiting for him back home. 3 days after Captain Red pulled Malik and Aina out of the sea, the cargo ship slid into the city's port like a quiet miracle. Malik stood at the railing as the skyline rose ahead, glass towers catching sunlight, cranes moving like metal birds, and streets buzzing with a life that felt unreal after the island's silence. The smell of fuel and salt mixed in the air. For most people, it was normal. For Malik, it felt like waking from a dream that had teeth. Aina stood beside him, wrapped in a blanket, watching everything with wide eyes. She didn't speak much, but her posture said it all. She was brave, but the world ahead looked loud. Captain Red gave Malik a steady look. "People will ask questions," he warned. "You ready for that?" Malik nodded once. "I'm ready to see my family." That same morning, across town, the Cross family home was a house full of tired hope. Mrs. Cross sat by the window again, praying quietly, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles looked pale. Nia paced the living room with her phone in hand, checking messages like a heartbeat. Then the front door opened. Pastor Eli Stone stepped inside, calm as always, but firm. He carried no folder, no paperwork, only presence. He looked at Mrs. Cross and spoke gently. "Your spirit is still waiting," he said. "That means the story isn't finished." Before Mrs. Cross could answer, Serena's heels clicked across the floor. Serena Vale walked in dressed like she was heading to a meeting, not living in a house full of grief. She carried a small stack of papers, her expression polished. "We need to finalize the sale today," she said calmly, laying the papers on the table. "The buyer is ready. This is the smart move." Mrs. Cross stared at the papers, her eyes filling. "Sell Malik's property while he's missing?" Serena sighed like the question annoyed her. "Mrs. Cross, you have to accept reality." Nia stepped forward, voice sharp. "Reality is you're rushing like someone who benefits from him being dead." Serena's smile thinned. "Careful, Nia. Grief makes people paranoid." Pastor Eli moved closer to the table and looked Serena straight in the eyes. "No," he said softly. "Greed makes people impatient." Serena's eyes flashed, just once. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and stepped away, answering quietly. "Yes, I'm here. Bring it." Nia watched her closely, suspicion burning, and that was when the doorbell rang. Nia opened the door. She froze so hard it was as if the whole house stopped breathing. Malik stood on the porch, not a picture, not a memory, a living man, thinner, bruised, but standing. Beside him stood a young woman wrapped in a blanket, calm but wary, Aina. For a full second, Nia couldn't speak. Then her breath exploded out of her like laughter and crying at the same time. "Malik," she choked. Malik's voice was hoarse but real. "Nia!" Nia threw her arms around him, shaking. Mrs. Cross rushed forward, hands trembling, touching Malik's face like she needed proof he wasn't a vision. Then she broke, tears pouring as she pulled him into a mother's embrace. My son, she whispered. I knew. Pastor Eli closed his eyes briefly, relief softening his face. He murmured, "Thank you," under his breath. Aina stood quietly near the doorway, overwhelmed but steady. Malik glanced back at her, giving her a small nod. "You're safe here." Then Serena entered the hallway. She stopped mid-step. Her smile was already forming out of habit, until her eyes landed on Malik. The color drained from her face so fast it was almost frightening. For a heartbeat, she looked like someone who had seen a ghost. Then her expression snapped back into place, smooth and controlled.